my minutes format.
We're good.
Type it.
All right, great. So first on the agenda, of course, we got the Pledge of Allegiance. Do we have a flag here?
You can.
If not, we'll just say the Pledge of Allegiance real quick. All right.
Okay.
So stand up. Okay. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. There we go. All right. So next, we have a roll call. Dennis, can you take care of that?
Sure. I will go
Please.
ahead and take care of the roll call. So we have Antonio.
Here.
Present. Jackie, present.
Here.
Pep,
Yep.
Here.
present. Stephanie, present. Bob, present.
Yep.
Okay. So that leaves us with Mark, absent. And who else? That's it, isn't it?
No.
What about Wayne?
Oh, Wayne.
Sharon is also, I don't know if she's actually on the committee, but she is, I think she's supposed to be at the meetings.
Sharon's
Yeah, she's
member.
not part of the
Not
official. So.
Okay.
I think you're missing Dennis, Wayne, and Mark, right?
Yeah, Dennis Smith. Okay.
So we still
Got
do
it.
have a quorum, which is good. All right. Do we have a motion to approve the agenda?
I'll move to approve the agenda.
Great.
I'll second.
Great. All right. All in favor of approving the agenda, please say yes.
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 All opposed, no. All right. So that passes unanimously. Next, we have public comment. Comments can't exceed 3 minutes per person. Dennis, do we have anybody that is calling in?
There's nobody in the waiting room.
Okay. Great. Well, then we'll move on. So we have 4 new business items. First, hopefully pretty routine, we need to approve the minutes from our March 10th meeting. Kind of hard to believe it was that long ago, but I'm excited to get going again here. So do we have a motion to approve the March?
So moved.
Great. Second?
I'll support.
Great, thanks, Bob. All right, all in favor, please say yes.
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 All opposed, abstaining. Great, that also passes unanimously. So for item number 2, we have a discussion of our definition of what we mean when we say affordable housing. You know, housing affordability was definitely the biggest issue, I think, that came out of our March 10th meeting. But we kind of need to know exactly what we mean by that. So Dennis, do you mind sort of summarizing a couple of the documents that you sent along to the committee with regards to what you were able to find?
So I had sent a Google link to a number of background materials that we had, and one of the ones that I had sent out was the demographic and housing chapter of the community master plan, and then I had sent also a kind of an affordable housing definition that I had put together doing a little bit of work, and I think that was a request from the committee last time. And there is no real national definition, rather it's a recommended standard, and it's, you know, basically the methodology behind it is calling anything that a house or a dwelling to be considered affordable is one that a household can obtain for 30% or less of its income. And then that standard itself varies state to state between cities and states and other cities due to median income levels. I went in to put some data in there, but it's really that's statewide. It doesn't look at each community. You need to drill it down to the census tract for what the median income is in each individual census tract that would help define that. And then I had basically punted to chapter 4 to take a look at what the community was seeing. But pretty much the standard across the board is, 30% or less of your income shouldn't be able to get you housing for it to be considered affordable. Now, there are different, based upon average median income for an area, there are different vacancy rates and so on and so forth. So really, that's all I have.
Thanks, Dennis. That's really helpful. And I think that's a good, I have also, in the research that I've done, 30% of your household income is generally the standard that's used. So that's really helpful. I don't know if anybody else has thoughts on this before I have one idea that I wanted to share, but if anybody else has thoughts on this. Okay. Well, what I was thinking is that I think that it would be good for us to formally adopt some kind of definition. I think this 30% household income standard that Dennis researched is good. I would just add that I also think it might be useful for us to do what a lot of like housing authorities as well as the state and federal government have done across the country, and sort of make a distinction for the purposes of our work between low income and sort of more middle income, like missing middle or workforce housing is the term that's used a lot, based on the percentage of area median income for which that housing would be affordable. So like my suggestion would be that in addition to adopting this 30% of household income affordability standard, that you're not spending more than 30% of your household income on housing, in order for it to be considered affordable, that we also perhaps say that, for the purposes of our committee, we'll define low income housing, or we could just call it affordable housing, as a housing that is affordable for households earning 80% of the area median income or below, and workforce housing as housing that's affordable for 80 to 120% of the area median income. Those are both standards that are used. So the 80 to 120%, that's like what the Brookings definition defines workforce housing as, that's what MISHTA defines it as. And the below 80%, that's where you start becoming eligible for low income housing tax credits through the federal government. So I think that it would be useful to make those distinctions with some hard numbers. So I don't know what other people's thoughts are.
I'm in favor of that.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense.
Great. Bob, what are your thoughts?
I agree. It adds some detail.
It's good to have that stuff defined so that when we're using this terminology, we know what we're talking about.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Good. Well, in that case, I'll make a motion that we adopt, as our standard for what we mean by affordable as housing that, household is affordable for households such that they don't have to spend more than 30% of their household income on housing. And then I would, also in the same motion, move that we adopt our definition of low income housing as housing that is affordable for households earning below 80% of the area median income, and workforce housing as housing that is affordable for households earning between 80 and 120% of the area median income. And just for context, the area median income for the city of Marquette, according to the 2010 census, was about $36,000. So, which is probably brought down quite a bit by the student population, but in that area.
And it did bump up a little bit, and there was an update that I had found that I didn't include it because it's in the American Community Survey, but it's a
Yeah, the
projection.
ACS.
And it did bump up to like around 40, but I'd feel more comfortable waiting till the new census was done.
Oh, yeah. And the nice thing about these definitions is that they're not dependent on what the area median income actually is. You know, they're flexible, right? When that new census data comes in.
So can I just interrupt to ask, so the low-income housing is what percent of the median income?
Below 80%. Because that's where you become eligible for low-income housing tax credits through HUD, like nationwide.
Yep.
And then the 80 to 120% figure is just derived from a Brookings Institution report that I read, as well as MISHDA's definition. I'm actually working on a MISHDA workforce housing project through my job with the county right now. So that's the reason I know that.
Mm-hmm.
Do I need to be keeping track of motions and seconds and stuff like that, Dennis, or are you doing that?
I have it. I'm typing out the minutes right now as we speak.
Just so everyone's
I was just
aware,
writing
there's
down.
going to be a recorded version of this on YouTube available, so you need to go back.
Great.
I would second the motion.
So thanks, Jackie. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor, please say yes.
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 All opposed, no. Abstaining. Great, so that passes.
Who was the second on that?
Jackie.
Me, Jackie.
Got it.
Well, that's good. I think it'll be good for us to have those definitions moving forward, make things a little bit more concrete. So item 3 under new business, we have a discussion about housing data, what kind of data we need, as well as the availability of city-specific data. And I'm not sure if everybody was able to take a look at the some of the survey data that I sent along, or that Dennis shared, but I shared it with him. So just for a little bit of context, I guess first thing we could discuss is some of this survey data from the Marquette County Master Plan Survey. So I work for Marquette County full time, and we're currently going through the process of renewing our county master plan. And so we conducted a community survey across Marquette County of county residents, which got well over 3,000 responses, and about 1,300 of those responses were from City of Marquette residents. And so what I did is I went into our survey data with the permission of my boss and everything. I got all this data together, specifically all the housing related data from that survey. And I think you can see that the survey was more or less, despite being an online only survey, it was more or less representative of Marquette's demographics and population. There were some really interesting survey responses that essentially emphasize that affordable housing and more like missing middle housing options are really badly needed in the city, that housing is a top priority for people in the city. And there were some, I think, really great quotes that came out of there that are very, some of them are very concerning, others are, yeah. I don't know what your thoughts are.
They are, and I appreciated having those surveys, but I get a little frustrated with everyone wanting not something handed to them, but they want the government to do things that are free market. And I guess one of my frustrations is it even said in there, younger people don't want to work on a house. Well, that's kind of what a starter house is. And they are available in town. And I get really frustrated when people say, but there's so much work to do. Well, it might be dated and you might have to paint, but that's kind of what a first-time home is. And I think we need to make sure that we manage our expectations with reality and not just what someone is saying, needs to be handed to them. Does that make me sound awful?
No.
I don't think so at all. No. And I think that I definitely understand your frustration there. I think that, when I was reading some of those comments, I guess my interpretation was the ones you're talking about. I think my interpretation was less that that people wanted something handed to them, and more that, you know, like for example, like right now, or, you know, even at any point in the next like 5 years, like I realistically, even if I had the money to purchase a starter home, I wouldn't have the financial resources to fix it up, even if I wanted to. You know what I mean? I think that was more where some people are coming from, but that was just my interpretation. I don't know if other people had any thoughts about that, or just the survey data in general.
For me, I mean, when we bought our first house, it wasn't in the city, but we just, what it looked like wasn't necessarily a high priority. It was whether we had to replace big systems in the house, like heating or plumbing or anything like that. So for me, that's how I would interpret that. Like if you have to paint, or you know, if you don't like the countertop, oh well, that comes later, you know. But if you have to replace a furnace, or you need a new boiler, things like that, those are big ticket items that I wouldn't want. Like what Evan's saying, it's difficult once you put your down payment on that house, it eats up all the money that you saved.
Totally agree. And
Yeah.
and I think what so many people don't realize in that are taking the survey and that are out there in general is I'm amazed at how many still believe you have to have 20% down to purchase a house.
Right.
There have been many instances that I have gotten first-time home buyers into homes for less than they would have spent getting into an apartment. And I think it's not just a function of finding more things that don't exist, but also explaining and sharing what does exist and is available. I think people don't realize that, you know, you can get into a house for sometimes 3% down, and you can have the seller rebate you that 3% towards your closing costs. So it's like we can get people into homes. They just need to start talking and stop complaining, you know. And it may not be, I guess I think we're a little bit spoiled in Marquette City in that we think everything should be right 2 blocks from 3rd Street. And sometimes in some areas, housing affordability within 10 miles is considered prime. And we need to expand our definition of where is acceptable. Does that make sense?
I couldn't find the comments that we're talking about. Are these like written notes? Which
Yeah, can
document are
you
those in?
can you screen share, Evan? Or I have the ability to share it too, but I'm not sure. I missed that part of the comments.
Yeah, I mean, I can see the survey results, but I don't see anything written. I just see like charts.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I'm on the
the-
wrong document, or I mean, I did review these and I didn't notice
Yep.
that.
Yeah,
I
I'm
agree.
scrolling through trying to find it right now.
I have a 52-page summary, but I don't see
Oh,
quotes
no,
in
I
there.
see it. It's the public opinion data. Okay, so it's a separate document. I'm there.
Yeah, so Dennis shared, you know, with the whole committee, he shared a sort of like a Google Drive folder.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's in there. It's under, there's 2 documents. One of them is more just like something I wrote up, and then another one is much more visual. One of them is called Marquette Housing Data. The other one's called City of Marquette County Master Plan Community Survey Data.
And did anyone else sit in? I think, Evan, you were there on the task force.
Yeah. So for context, everybody, recently, so this is the other bit of data that we've got. I kind of wanted to discuss the survey data, but we can also just acknowledge that also in that Google Drive folder that Dennis shared with everybody, you're going to see a document like a slideshow, a PDF, a slideshow that says, you know, Marquette County, Marquette City and Township Housing Assessment Focus Group.
Mhm.
And that is a presentation that was given at a virtual meeting recently that was hosted by Central Upper Peninsula Planning and Development, QPAD. It's our regional planning organization. And QPAD gave a presentation, and they're currently conducting a housing needs assessment for the city of Marquette and Marquette Township. And they had some additional data in there, so everybody knows what we're talking about.
If you haven't had a chance to read through that, I thought it was fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. So does anybody else, I mean, I don't know, like Bob or, Antonio, did you guys have any particular like reactions or thoughts to the survey data that we had from the county master plan, or any particular thoughts or questions about that?
No, I thought the comments, kind of like what Stephanie said, were very interesting, and kind of gives you a sense of what people may think they're entitled to these days. And hopefully those thoughts are based in some kind of reality from Marquette area. Otherwise, I thought the data was useful, and gives us a better idea of age breakdown and other pieces of information.
So thanks, Bob. I totally agree on the second point. And for those that don't know me, my name is Antonio. Don, I missed the first initial meeting, so I apologize. Had a family emergency in Chicago, but just wanted to introduce myself first and foremost and thank the group for being here and talking about this important subject here. So as I reviewed the data, Evan, I shot you some thoughts on it as well from QPAD. One thing that I wanted to talk about as we segue into this is entries to barriers to entry, excuse me. So for example, I like Stephanie's real experience and world, kind of experience in the real estate scene. I think she has a amounts of data that, would be very useful and insightful. As I sit here thinking about it and going back to some of the comments, I think we have to realize that in Marquette County and the perspective of a younger demographic potentially could be burdensome with student loans. It could be the inability to have cash flow to be able to put down $80,000 to $100,000 in a renovation, in a fixer-upper. I think we need to look at those case by case. I'm not saying that that's the overall sentiment, but as we go into maybe more of broadening and being specific, I should say, on the definition of affordable housing, I'd like to see what the data is saying in terms of where the real need. I think, Evan, you brought this up, is maybe that middle workforce housing, et cetera. I think looking at it from the aspect of affordable housing is really important as well. So just getting some insight into that QPAD data, I thought that 9% of 25 to 34-year-olds that owned a home in the county, I believe it was relatively low. I'd like to see where that instrument comes from, what the national average is, and if that compares. I think that was striking to me, is that the younger demographic are not necessarily homeowners.
What was the age range on that?
I believe it was 25 to 34. Something in the 20s to low 30s. I can pull it up. I'll look it up as I go. So I think those are the two thoughts that I had from the data initially.
I think the idea of living specifically in the city versus outside of it is also interesting, in that it is probably not feasible for most people to buy their first house in the city of Marquette, because it is more expensive than other places. But it is also not unusual for people to have an hour-long commute, right, from where they buy their first house to the city that they work in. I mean, I think in Marquette and in the UP specifically, in Marquette County, where we do want to all walk to work and live 2 blocks off of 3rd Street and be able to have all that stuff right there. But I think one of the things is that the problem is that the more affordable housing in the outlying areas of the city of Marquette are there and available, but then that also requires you to have your own personal transportation to be able to get to where you're going. So I think a big piece of the puzzle is, public transportation, which I know is difficult in a rural area where people don't use it. And we have MarkTran, but it can only do so much. So I think that's a problem, because people, if they can't buy, their house in the middle of the city, it's possible they also don't have the most reliable vehicle to get them to and from work. So that's why they want to be in the city, So it's a lot of factors, but I think that's a big one.
And to your point, Jackie, I mean, I think that's absolutely correct. I mean, and we also got to think about, okay, so if I move out to Negaunee or Ishpeming, I mean, first of all, from the city of Marquette standpoint, we are a committee that's been appointed by the city commission of Marquette. I mean, that's a bad thing. Like, we don't want people to be leaving the city if we can avoid that, right? But given that somebody's moved out of Ishpeming-Negaunee, okay, well, now the percentage of their household income they're spending on housing has declined. So we might say, oh, great, now they have housing that they can afford. Well, but the percentage of their income they're spending on transportation, on gas or whatever, their maintenance on their car, that's probably going up a lot. So, you know, at what point, you know, I think once you get to a certain distance from the city, you're probably not necessarily coming out ahead. And certainly that public transportation piece. I don't know how much we're going to be able to talk about that, you know, with this committee, but it's definitely a conversation that needs to be had, I think, within the city of Marquette, but really, I think it's kind of a regional or a county-wide conversation.
So here real quick on that stat from the focus group meeting drive for the Marquette County homeowners by age, slide 23 of 52. I'll just read it real quick. Homeowners by age, Marquette City and Township, approximately 8.9%, so less than 10%, are comprised of 25 to 34-year-olds. 35 to 64 make up the majority at 58%, and 65 and over are about 30%, with half, a little bit more than half, 54% being owner occupied.
And I just emailed to everybody the national statistics. Age group nationally is 34%, but what we know anecdotally is the in the high income tech corridors, that age group is almost 100%. So those numbers are going to be skewed to areas that have that type of demographic. But I sent that to everybody, so you have it too.
Great, thank you, Stephanie. Yeah,
Thank
thanks, Antonio, for summarizing that. I suppose, you know, there's so much to dig in here. You know, we have an hour-long meeting today. I want to make sure that we're being efficient. But I would say, you know, we could spend a few more minutes on this topic if people have any other thoughts or questions about the data. I guess I would just briefly say that I think that, you know, when you look at the county survey data, it becomes very clear that housing is one of the top priorities, certainly one of the top 2 or 3 issues for city of Marquette residents. And that, especially when you start looking at the comments, it becomes clear that there's a need, I think, as Antonio touched on, and this is why it's important that we're defining both what we mean by low income as well as this kind of workforce housing, right? Is that there's a need for both in the city of Marquette. You know, I think at our last meeting, I don't remember if it was Jackie or Sharon, but one of you two said that, you know, the Marquette Housing Authority, your units are all full. You know, I mean, so there is no available low-income housing in Marquette, really. I mean, or very little. And that certainly comes through, you know, I think there's like the one comment about, you know, as a single mom, you know, I was taking out loans to pay my rent. You know, I mean, there's a few comments like that where you've got very poor people in the city who need more low-income housing. But then you also have an even larger number of people who are looking for that missing middle, that duplex that they can afford, you know, that smaller home.
I think that's one of the things that the task force touched on and that Mark talked about last time is the cost to build that. When you're building low income, there's subsidies galore for that. It's hard to find grants and subsidies for that missing middle, and finding that affordability is just hard to create. I think that was one of the things that I really appreciated of the task force, is coming into some zero lot lines and some what's considered a condo versus what's considered a domicile. And I think I guess I get very frustrated with the demonization of condos and high end, because those are needed just as much. They all pay property taxes too. So we need that balance. And I do want to point out that we had an a large influx. I consider 9 listings in this under populated segment. We had 9 listings come up in that 150 to 200 range, and they were all sold. I'm sorry, 215 range. They were all, I believe they all had offers within a week. So it was, and that was the hospital inventory that they opened up and brought onto the market. So nice to see that coming into that missing middle sort of demographic of housing inventory.
You're also probably never going to get middle income homes near the water, on the waterfront. That's where the condos are, and that's where the expensive housing is, you know? So that's, yeah.
Although I do love Keith Glendon when he was waxing about what could be and turning the space that is where the power plant, the Presque Isle power plant is, turning that into, you know, a high-end tech area with a workforce housing and, you know, integrating some of the things that they talked about in the task force with high density housing, maybe row houses and things like that. It does help that there are people that actually think that. So potentially, and that's not far, even the 550 side of the power plant property isn't far from anywhere in town.
Yeah. Well, you know, I think this is a good, unless does anybody have any final questions or comments on the data? If people weren't able to dig into it, I would encourage everybody to do that over the next month here. But does anybody have any other questions or comments?
Evan, this is Dennis. One thing that I would be remiss in not mentioning when they look at all this data, I think one thing that your committee really should look at is the cost of construction. And I didn't see it anywhere in that data, and that's a very important thing, because that's going to kind of lead to the bigger issue of income as well. And you know, the behind the scenes cost is pretty big. I mean, if you talk to developers, you know, they're going to tell you that their infrastructure the permit costs and so on are incredibly high. And to a certain point, you kind of have to extrapolate that data, because to them, if they're building a subdivision, their permit cost is putting in the water and sewer lines. Well, that's a standard that's going to be there. They consider it a permit cost, but I mean, the true cost of construction is very, very high right now, and I think you would be remiss if you didn't research that a little bit.
Absolutely. I think that would be a really good topic for future discussion. I also think that, you know, that you're absolutely right, Dennis. And I think that that's why moving forward, we might want to start repurposing, you know, some of the existing housing stock we have, or starting to look at how can we create a little bit more density, create more housing units without changing the character of single family neighborhoods and things like that. So, sorry, Dennis, what?
I disagreed with you.
Oh, thank you. And I think this is a good transition, actually, into our fourth and final new business item, which was a discussion of our timeline moving forward, what our plan is for the coming months. And eventually we're going to have to request an extension of the deadline that the city commission imposed for our initial report. But
that deadline is next month. I think it would make sense for us in this meeting to ask for an extension to January 15th for that information to the city commission.
Do you want to make that motion, Stephanie? That sounds good to me.
Can I consider that a made motion?
All right, great. A second?
I'll second.
Great. So is there any discussion? Just so everybody knows, the motion is to extend, to recommend the city commission extend our deadline for our initial report back to the city commission from September 30th to January 15th.
Is that long enough? Does that give us enough time? I mean, I don't know.
My fear is that without that, we're going to end up having really, really fantastic discussions and not put anything on the plate.
Yeah.
So
I
it
think
does
that-
keep us to the fire.
It does give us 4 more monthly meetings. And I also think, and I mean, this is another discussion that we can get into, but, you know, talking with Antonio and a couple other folks, I think that it would be great if moving forward, we can focus on a specific topic, or perhaps, you know, maybe 2 specific topics per meeting. But we might also, especially given that we've missed 4 meetings due to COVID-19 before we got Zoom going, we might want to look at extending the length of these meetings to like 90 minutes so we can have a more in-depth discussion. I think that with 4 like 90-minute meetings and then a meeting in early January where we vote on some kind of final, you know, initial report back to the commission, I think we could get it done. That's my personal opinion. I don't know, folks, feel free to disagree if you don't think that's realistic.
I mean, we're recommending things that the commission would have control over, or are we going to be recommending that, you know, work with the county to do X, Y, Z?
I don't think we know what we're going to be recommending yet.
I think it could be both, Jackie. I think it could be things, certainly I think needs to be some specific actions that the commission, that the city of Marquette can take.
Right.
You know, maybe not the commission alone, but like, you know, in concert with like the planning commission and other people that the city can take, but also, yeah, some of those opportunities for intergovernmental cooperation or public-private cooperation, I think would potentially be some of our recommendations too. I guess it's important to keep in mind as well, we're meeting until June of next year, so there'll be time to have a follow-up report as well if we miss anything.
Yeah, I'd like to just add a thought we could discuss later is bringing in a specific speaker or to supplement our research and also discussion. I think it'd be prudent and also to hone in on things that we already know. So Stephanie, I know that you're in the real estate world. There may be some things that you could bring to the table that we may not even know, demographics, data, et cetera. I'm thinking, you know, Mark could, or Dennis could bring more of that. Wayne could bring that construction element that we need and so desire. At least I'd like to propose that we also think about teaming up in couples or threes so that we could bring the discussion and optimize it a little bit more at the meetings if we're going to do the 90-minute ones. So.
And I agree with that. I'm comfortable with 90-minute meetings. I'm comfortable meeting in person. But what do we think the #1 priority of information that we need to gather is for our next meeting?
I think we should probably figure out what topic we want to discuss for the next 4, just generally, so that we kind of have an idea of what we should be looking into prior.
That was the discussion I was hoping to have once we got this motion out of the way.
Oh, yeah, let's get the motion out of the way. Sorry.
All right. So unless there's any more discussion, we can move to a vote on Stephanie's motion to recommend the deadline be extended to January 15th. All right, all in favor, please say yes.
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 All
Yes.
opposed, all abstaining. Great, that passes unanimously. So
this
Jackie,
how- this is
Dennis, go
Dennis.
ahead. Yeah.
I just need to know who was the second on that?
It was me
Jackie.
again. I'm very quiet, I guess.
But yeah,
Hey.
so
And it's extending the deadline for the committee report to January 15th, 2021.
yes.
Got it. Thank you.
And, you know, I imagine like if need be, our actual presentation to the commission could be after that, but, you know, just sharing our report with them by January 15th, having it approved by then, I think is sort of what we're looking at here.
So what do we think the 4 basic areas are? I think analysis of current inventory is important. And I think building costs are something, and the whole building process is something that's at least a 90-minute meeting.
I think somewhere inside of that meeting also would be where, if we were to encourage new builds, where those new builds would happen. So there's only so much space within the city.
Yeah, so I think that adding from reading the previous minutes from March 10th, one topic that came up a lot is density. Density could be tied to zoning. Zoning obviously is a planning. There you go. Zoning is the planning and city. I believe it's the jurisdiction of the city. So I would say zoning is probably, I don't know if we could narrow that down more, but density zoning, I think that's an appropriate discussion to have to see what capabilities we would be able to recommend. or look
And I
into.
think that QPUD task force does cover some of that information quite well.
Yeah, so from what I'm hearing right now, I think that there's a discussion that needs to happen about construction costs as well as where new construction could potentially take place. And I think we'd want to look at different kinds of new construction, maybe you could have an inventory of single family vacant lots that you could build a home on up to larger apartment buildings in the city. And then I think that the second thing that I'm hearing is, this need to explore, zoning amendments or changes that might need to take place to encourage missing middle housing and density and things like that. That's, in a sort of an incremental and appropriate scale to, kind of the community character of most of Marquette's neighborhoods. But then.
So realistically, how can we turn the old hospital into housing?
That would be a very good option.
Yes.
I mean, if we're talking about location, that's where everyone wants. We're talking about something that has the potential to become blight if it's not reutilized. It could work well. Yes, Dennis?
This is Dennis, and I can help here from an administrative standpoint, because that's kind of what I do for the city in terms of something like that. And, we've laid the groundwork for that to occur. The Planning Commission updated the community master plan, identified that as a potential reuse opportunity for housing. And then subsequent to that, the Planning Commission had amended the land development code such that I believe that majority of that property is zoned mixed use, which means it would permit the smaller lot line, zero lot line, duplexes, triplexes, row houses, all of those kinds of things. So from the legal framework standpoint of the city of Marquette, working with the Planning Commission, we were able to kind of prep that battlefield, for lack of a better term. Now, really, because it's privately held property, now it's going to be up to the market to figure that out.
But there might be ways that we can, and this would be in talking to, I don't even know who we would need to talk to, but there could be ways that the city/county/government units could incentivize that type of redevelopment.
Is that space eligible as brownfield?
It is. So to your point, Stephanie, so I served on the Brownfield Redevelopment Authority for the city before being elected to the commission. And I do know that, when Viridia was interested in purchasing the old hospital property, that brownfield, that was a question that we were discussing of, okay, well, are they going to need a brownfield plan? Seems likely. What would be eligible? Can they incorporate their demolition costs? The problem is that the demolition costs for that site, even if, realistically, that's why the hospital relocated. It's because to renovate that old building would have been prohibitively expensive. So in order to do that, I mean, you would need to demolish essentially pretty much all the buildings that are on that site, realistically. I think that's the conclusion that Viridia probably came to when they were looking at it. And it's very like millions and millions of dollars to do that. But certainly, I mean, that if you found a developer who was willing, or developers who were willing and able to do that, that would be an option. I think, also you're dependent then on, Duke Life Point and their willingness to sell the property. But in any case, that's definitely, I think, like if we have a future meeting where we're discussing opportunities for new construction or redevelopment, that would be like exhibit 1A for sure, that we'd have to have a deeper discussion about. But I guess,
Do you remember the developer's name? And I've sat in meetings with her, and I'm just not coming up with her name right now. She was on the task force. She's part of the group that redid the orphanage.
Yeah, I don't remember her name, but I do have her contact info, I believe.
I
But
do
yeah,
too.
yeah.
Because she
So
might be a very good guest resource for us on what that would take and what developers would look for that we could incentivize to make it easier for the public entity or private entity to do that.
yeah, and
We've,
go ahead, Dennis. Sorry.
I can add to this a little bit. So a lot of what we do behind the scenes involves the county land bank, and they have a good relationship with MISTA. And we had looked at the county land bank, possibly purchasing some of the vacant property that was out there, aside from the old facility. And we were working with MISTA on some possible modular type projects in there. But it was nearly impossible to pull that off because the cost of construction. And that's why I'm mentioning, I had mentioned that. What it's really gonna take for something like that to happen is somebody's gonna have to be heavily incentivized to put it in. I mean, MISTA wouldn't even consider it.
Yeah, I think that the other topic
Not
that
like put a bummer on everyone, but I mean, it's something that we do work on.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Dennis. We are actually with the county land bank, we are moving forward with some modular single-family home construction in Ishpeming and Negaunee. I think that will be, to see how that project turns out, hopefully we'll have all 5 of those homes complete by next year. And that'll be a really interesting proof of concept to see, okay, can we make this work? Of course, the city of Marquette, you have some additional costs, but at least the cost of construction probably isn't that much higher than it is in, say, Ishpeming or Negaunee. But it's more the question of acquiring the property, finding the vacant lots that are all over the place in Ishpeming and Negaunee in the city of Marquette. I think just, getting back to a point that Jackie made earlier, the third, in addition to the zoning / missing middle housing and density discussion, as well as the discussion of potential for new construction or redevelopment, there's that third piece that I think Jackie mentioned, which probably should come first, which is getting an inventory of what we actually have in the city of Marquette. Where are we at? Do we have enough, where are we at with how much low income housing we have? What are their vacancy rates? How many rental units do we have? What are our vacancy rates for rentals as a whole, for single family, like owner occupied homes, that sort of thing. And so I think that would be a good place to start for next meeting. We could maybe tack on another topic, another smaller to medium sized topic if we wanted. But I think that's certainly a good place to start for our next meeting.
So who keeps?
So we're looking at vacancy rates for the next meeting?
Vacancy rates, as well as just the housing stock in the city of Marquette, I think would be a good place to start. And I mean, this might be an area where, Stephanie, like your expertise and knowledge as a realtor could be very helpful. And maybe this is where, like Antonio was saying, we create a little working group over the next month.
Well, I have I can generate an 18-month sale listing by price range for the city of Marquette, and I can send that to Dennis to be included in our next packet. I already have it written down.
Okay.
And if I could just add, both real good points. So I agree with everything here. I just like to add potentially, Dennis, this might be more a question from administrative / legal perspective on the city of Marquette. Any land that is currently owned that would be potentially possibly able to discuss for building zones, or zones that could be built as row houses, as single family homes, as multifamily dwellings that the city already owns. So a lot of the barriers that I'm hearing throughout just nationally and reading and discussions is we need to act with an urgency that is today, that is now. We need to find ways to build as soon as possible. And a lot of the ideas that are coming forth are really, really good ideas. So Stephanie, I completely agree with the hospital. But then also supplementing that with how do we get with built in the right context, from the city's perspective, how do we incentivize those developers to use current available low-hanging fruit, such as land that is just sitting there? It could be collecting, a greater payroll tax. There's so many incentives that we could possibly recommend that, would obviously have a lot more intricacies tied to them. But I think just, Evan, from discussions with you, I do want to know from the city's perspective, how much land the city owns that would be available for such use.
Not much.
Yeah, as Dennis said, not a lot, but it would be good to get an inventory of that for sure for our upcoming meeting. I think that for our upcoming meeting, perhaps what we could do is take an this is what I think. I think we could take an inventory of housing stock as it exists in Marquette, have a discussion about that with including, vacancy rates and average sale prices and things like that. So have that discussion. And then maybe at the end of the meeting, we can also begin this discussion about potential areas for new development or redevelopment. Does that sound like a good, and this would be a 90-minute meeting. Does that sound like a good next meeting for September?
Yes.
Great.
We want to start those meetings at like 10:30 instead of 11 then?
What do people think about that?
I'd be fine with that.
Mhm.
Yep.
I'm okay with that.
And is there anyone that we would want to guest in to aid us in that discussion?
Perhaps, if we're talking about, opportunities for new construction, perhaps the woman from the developer that was involved with the Grandview project. I still can't remember her name, but she was very impressive in that meeting. Stephanie, if you've got that contact, or I think I have it too, maybe we can reach out.
And she might be better off in the next meeting after that.
Yeah. I actually have, my idea as well for our October meeting was that would be where we could begin this discussion of like zoning and like what is missing middle housing and things like that. And I think that I have a connection that might be very helpful with that as well.
So what we're asking Dennis to get for us is an inventory, essentially a property inventory for the city of Marquette.
Yeah.
We have that. That's easy.
Yeah. And then also I think having an inventory of just what kind of housing exists in Marquette and, where we're at both in terms of, the sale price and vacancy rate or, rental price vacancy rate for both rentals and owner occupied homes in the city. And I think specifically it would be very useful to, in addition to that, have a perspective on the supply and demand for low income housing as well.
And Mark may be able to have some impact on the providing us with the rental inventory information.
Awesome.
Do you want numbers from the Housing Commission?
Yeah,
Just
That would be
absolutely.
really helpful.
Okay.
Yeah. Awesome. Does anybody else have any other topics that we would want to discuss? I just also putting a pin in that, we do want to have that discussion about construction costs and things like that at some point later this fall as well. And also a topic that came up at the last meeting was accessory dwelling units, which I'm sure will come up in the zoning and density discussion, but maybe there needs to be
We have them.
discussion about that.
Yeah, that was
I'll-
handled
I'll,
well in the task force.
Mm-hmm.
Let me just chime in on the ADUs. We do permit those already.
Yep.
They are permitted in the new land development code, and the planning commission is also loosening the restriction on those as we speak.
Good.
Currently, there were two requirements for accessory dwelling units. First and foremost, you couldn't have an accessory dwelling unit where both of the units on the land were rentals. You had to have an owner occupied for self-police, at least one of the units, which is pretty standard across the nation. And then the second standard was that it could only be a relative, and they're removing the could only be a relative part. And so, that's kind of like the status already.
Absolutely. And I think that's a great place to start with the ADUs and easing up on that. You know, my dad lived in an ADU and he was in college and starting at NMU PD back in like the late 70s. And at some point they became illegal. So it's good that we're moving back in that direction. Yeah, so I want to be respectful of everybody's time.
Real quick, Evan, one more thing. From the last meeting minutes agenda, March 10th, I believe someone made a comment that NMU should be reached out to with regards to rentals rentals in general, and how they impact, or the student population impacts that discussion. I don't know if it was had, but is there any update on potentially bringing them on to speak or to report on at some point?
Words right out of my mouth, Antonio. So yes, that was the other future topic I was going to suggest at some point later this fall, or maybe in December or whatever, is the impact of students and student housing on affordability and housing availability in the city, what we can do to provide more, you know, affordable student housing. And that was definitely a big topic. And I also have a connection, a guy named Jeff Corpy, who used to handle housing for NMU and is now actually just recently been hired by a housing developer in California. So he would be a great resource to bring in as well. And I actually already talked to him about it and he said he'd be interested. So maybe again, later on, you know, that could be a discussion we have, maybe a meeting specifically dedicated to those student housing needs. That's a big chunk of our population, big chunk of our housing supply taken up there.
And actually, Lee Haynes might help on some of that because he does handle a lot of rentals and he's seeing what the student rentals are desiring now that we don't have. So he'd be a good resource. And I have to run. We have a econ board meeting Zoom.
Sounds good.
Switch Zooms.
All right.
See you, everybody.
Great. Yeah, nice to see you too, Stephanie. And I guess with
Stephanie.
that, you know, I want to be respectful of everybody's time. So unless anybody has any final comments, you know, under the agenda here, under committee member comment, or if we have any correspondence, Dennis.
No correspondence.
All right. Any committee member comments? Anything people want to share?
Good meeting, Evan. Good job.
Oh, thank you, Bob. Thanks for participating. Cool. Well, with that, I'll say we're adjourned at 12:01 p.m. and we'll get some of this research done and get back in about a month with our third meeting, I guess.
That'll be at 10:30.
Yes, 10:30 to 12 are our future meetings.
Got it.
Awesome. Thank you all.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.